JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is a series that I personally absolutely love to death, and saying that JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is anything but daring in its execution is ridiculous. Saying JoJo's isn't weird and JoJo's isn't pushing boundaries is like saying the sky isn't blue. There's a reason that JoJo's is able to stick out in every single manga and anime. It's able to blend this absolute absurdity with really realistic stuff. Everyone gets into JoJo's for the fun, wacky nature of it all, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of heart to these stories, and that's what keeps people coming back for more. Araki is such a great writer because he's able to create this sense of fun throughout the entire journey, but slap the reader in the face with a sense of reality, that things are serious. Araki does this especially well as the parts have continued onward and onward, but even at the beginning of the story, there are many characters who are willing to sacrifice themselves and go through all this insane stuff just to get our heroes along their way. But that realism doesn't just go into the scenario that these characters are in, it most importantly goes to the characters themselves. Ever since the beginning of the story, Jonathan was meant to portray the hero character, and as the series has gone onward, the heroic nature of the Joestars has continued to be tested as Araki has created more nuanced and gray characters. In part 5, our main character is literally a gang member. In part 6, our main character is a prisoner. And in parts 7 and 8, they're ready to just murder on the spot. And part 9 has pushed the boundaries even further, with our main characters having this immensely depressing backstory that wouldn't be dissimilar from how Araki would write a villain in his previous works. I've been lucky enough to read part 9 ever since it started its monthly serialization last year with the first chapter, and I've gotten pretty attached to a lot of these characters, but there's always been that sort of lack of knowing who they actually are. We got it really recently with a new party member that joined the cast that had a really tragic backstory. The world was sort of putting everything against him from achieving his goal of helping his brother because of his past, and I felt like that was a very strong, resonating theme. The people in charge make it harder for people to get what they want to because of something they view as off, or weird, or strange, or just bad. This was a great way to jumpstart Jodio and Dragona's flashback by having them have a really similar experience to this new party member. I really like these two. I love their sibling dynamic. I think they both complement each other really well, and I think they make each other better and the part better as a whole. I think that Dragona watching over Jodio and Jodio making sure that Dragona is able to defend themselves is really amazing. Now, as funny as JoJo can be, JoJo can just as equally be really intense. Araki is great at having these shock value moments that are used to make you just hate a character so much. And Araki does use some very obvious examples of this from time to time, his most prominent one in my opinion being his many usages of animal abuse, but without a doubt, sexual assault and discrimination against people of different races is another massive one that immediately gets you to just despise a character. And these clips I'm showing you are only from the first 3 parts of the story, and Araki tended, especially in Ultra Jump, to get a lot more graphic and realistic as the story went on. And I feel as though this moment, right here, is one of the best uses of this in his entire catalog. As I said earlier, Araki is no stranger to pushing boundaries in manga. One of the most important characters in the entire franchise, and the one that basically kickstarts everything, Dio Brando, is canonically a bisexual villain. Part 5 saw the first ever gay characters in JoJo after the series had been inspired by many gay icons. Part 6 had a female lead, something Araki wanted to do personally because he felt as though there was so much opportunity there, especially in a shonen magazine directed towards boys. And Araki's stint in Ultra Jump continues this trend and gets even more in depth, having these characters be super relevant to the plot. In Part 7, the First Lady of the United States is canonically bisexual, and in Part 8, the Higashikata family has a legacy of having their firstborn sons cross-dress until they're 12 years old, and Dragona's identity is very much the same way. It's an integral part of who they are, and not something you can simply brush aside, and I felt like that was so amazing. It's important and it's relevant, and no character treats it with any distaste except for villains, because obviously our main protagonist is the sibling of this character. Dragona is going to be viewed in a positive light, whether you like it or not. Somehow there's shockingly been a lot of backlash of the scene of Dragona getting assaulted on the bus, and I could understand why if this wasn't the case for JoJo for literally decades at this point. There fundamentally isn't anything different here except for the fact that Dragona is gender non-conforming and transgender leaning. We don't know the exact definition for it, so I'm not going to put anything cemented in stone, but the fact that Dragona has these associations is seemingly what's causing a lot of people to get very uncomfortable about this situation. Putting these onto Dragona makes it seem as though there is a problem with Dragona being in this situation versus the situation itself happening in the first place. Because if this happened to anyone else, would there be an issue? One of the absolutely most uncomfortable scenes in Steel Ball Run is Lucy Steele being assaulted by Funny Valentine. The scene is incredibly uncomfortable and it makes you absolutely despise an antagonist in the story. What's making this different than anything else? Nothing. There's nothing different about Dragona being assaulted or Lucy being assaulted, unless you personally feel uncomfortable seeing a transgender leaning person being assaulted. But saying that JoJo has been doing something that's different than what it's been doing since the genesis of the story itself, that's ridiculous. That's completely ridiculous to me. And that's why when Araki writes moments like Dragona being attacked on the bus and being berated by this girl who is so stuck up and surrounded by all these things that make her seemingly untouchable, it makes you really sympathize with Dragona's plight and makes us respect Jodio for him going to protect Dragona. However, Araki then immediately flips this on its head, with Jodio doing something truly heinous and attacking all of these kids, most of them unrelated to the thing that happened to Dragona, simply because the girl that attacked Dragona was on the bus. So not only are we getting this incredibly realistic depiction of harassment of transgender people, but we're also then getting a horribly blunt and realistic look at how schools are treating the safety of the kids in them. And something that I think might have actually inspired Araki to place this part in Hawaii in the first place. That wealth disparity, that idea that some people are so much higher than others, goes to show that there's this imbalance, but also that sort of inevitability that something might happen that you can't even get a hand on because it's just so far out of your control. So now the time has come for me to answer the question I raised in the title of this video. Do I think JoJo has gone too far? And to me, it hasn't gone far at all. Araki's been daring ever since the beginning of his career, and this is just another rung in his massive repertoire of doing things that are completely out of the box. He decided to make Jodio have psychopathic tendencies and antisocial personality disorders for a reason, and this is a perfect example of him using those tools he decided to put into this character as something that not only fuels the story going forward, fuels the connection between Jodio and Dragona, and how what Jodio did in this moment completely changed his life forever. And I think that has so much potential for not just this moment and these characters right now, but for the rest of the story going forward. So having this moment be something so intense, so shocking, something that will stick in the reader's minds forever, but not just because of how shocking it was, but how important it was for our main characters, means a lot. And having this moment show and cement how different Jodio is from the rest of his former Joestars shows what makes him him. And that's what's going to get a lot of people really invested in his character, especially since he's older now. He's more menacing now, and he probably is even more fed up now than he was before. And the fact this is just the start of the story, things can get even crazier. Jodio can do some even more unhinged things. And that's going to be what makes Dragona and his connection be even more impactful, and his growing connections with his new teammates. Jodio as a protagonist, in my opinion, has so much potential because he can do so many gray things. Johnny and Josuke were really great examples of gray protagonists because they were very self-centered on their goal of making sure they had something that helped them overcome their struggle. And Jodio's struggle is seemingly something he doesn't really care much about. His psychopathic tendencies and his antisocial personality disorder doesn't really bother him in any way, and he's constantly just saying, oh, he'll be careful, oh, he'll do better, in order to satiate the comfort of other people he actually cares about. Does he actually want to be happy? Does he actually want to feel satisfied in his life? We don't really know, and I think that gray area for what his mindset is makes him really, really compelling. And the fact that he's based off of Giorno, who I mentioned all the way back at the beginning of this video, was the first ever dip into truly gray characters in my opinion, makes it really evident that Araki could do a lot with this character. In my mind, JoJo hasn't gone that far. This is all relatively par for the course for Araki at this point. He's showcased a bunch of this stuff before, and with Jodio doing some of this stuff when he was 11 years old, This only leads me to think that it's going to get even more intense and even more crazy, and this could be the most graphic part of JoJo we've ever seen. Araki has a lot he could sink his teeth into, so I'm excited to see where he takes the story going forward.